Hello guys, hope all of you are doing great. In the last video, we have seen how to connect with a database from a PHP program and how we can execute SQL commands in a database from a PHP program. And also we have seen like how to retrieve the results returned by an SQL command and how we can process those results using a PHP program. So these are things that we have seen with examples in the last video. And also at the end, what we did is we added that database feature with this login page. So at the end, what we did is that if the user writes here a roll number and a password, which is there in the database, then our program says it's a valid user and password. Or anything the user types here which is not there in this database, then it will say that it is invalid user and password. So for example, let's try. I give here the roll number as CSB210010001 and then password. I give here a wrong password for the first time, some garbage characters. And I click here on this login button and say our program is saying invalid username and password. Now suppose here I now type the actual password, which is against this roll number, the password is ABC123. Now I type here, believe me, I'm typing here ABC123. And as soon as I click on this login button, you can see that it is saying that it is valid username and password. So up to this part, everything is done. Now what we want actually is that instead of saying this like when the user types here a valid username and password, instead of saying valid username and password, what we want is we want our program to redirect to a different page. So for example, the student home page. As soon as the student types here the valid username and password, we want our program to redirect us to, or redirect the user to, student home page. So let's see how to achieve that thing. Okay, so for that reason, what we are going to do is first we are going to create, under this user interface folder, we are going to create another file. I'm calling it a student home.php. And inside this PHP file, for the time being, let me write here to welcome to or welcome, that's all. Okay, how are you, say how are you. Okay, suppose something I wrote in this student home.php. Okay, and right now this is the content of student home.php. Then what we want is, as soon as the user clicks on this button and after verification, instead of displaying this message, like whenever the program has to display this message, instead of displaying this, we want our program to redirect us to that as student home.php. Let's see how to do that. See here, we know that if the user clicks on this login button, then we know that this JavaScript function will be executed, right? That is, as soon as the user clicks on login button, this function gets executed. And inside this function, we have written the code like if the user types some non-empty string for this username and password field, this JavaScript function makes an AJAX call to this login ajax.php file, right? And after returning from the AJAX call, once that AJAX call is returned, based on the status returned by, or based on the the value which is there against this key status, our JavaScript program is either displaying valid username and password or invalid username and password. Now, if the username and password is invalid, so this is the message that we want to see on the screen. So we do not have to do anything in this else part. But in the if part, like if this condition is true, that is from the from the server side code against this status key, if we are receiving an OK message, then instead of writing this message on the page, what we want is we want our JavaScript program to redirect us to a different page, and the different page name is studenthome.php. Let's first do that. How to do that? Like using JavaScript function, if you want to redirect the user to a different page, then what you can do is you can make use of this function, document dot location dot replace. Okay, and then there you can type within this replace function, you can type the URL of the page that you want the user to redirect to. So what basically it will do is the effect will be as if you are typing the different location or different URL on the browser and pressing enter, the same effect. Okay, So let's type here, say we want the user to be redirected to slash our project one oblique user interface oblique uh, this one student home.php student home.php. So this is the page where we want our user we want our user to be redirected. Okay, and whether this message, let it be like that. Even if this message was written on the page, since we are redirecting the page to a different page, then we will be immediately seeing the content of, we should be able to see the content of this page immediately. Okay, now let's try. So for that reason, what you do is you refresh the page. Now see, whenever you do some changes in the JavaScript code, one thing is that in this address bar, you have to actually hard refresh the page. It means what? Like you click on this address bar and there you press Control Shift and R key. So it will reload the JavaScript file. Sometimes what happens is that suppose see here, we are not changing the name of the JavaScript file. So when we execute this page, when we executed this page for the first time, then that JavaScript file, certainly it will be downloaded to our local computer. But later on and it will be stored in some cache memory. Okay, and later on, if we do any change in that JavaScript file, so instead of downloading it again from the server, what it can do is it can use if the JavaScript file name is not changed, it can use the old version of the JavaScript file. So to make sure that actually a new version of the JavaScript file is downloaded from the server, you have to do a hard refresh. Okay, so for that reason, how you're going to do that, you click on the address bar and then you press Control Shift R and then done. Okay, let's after refreshing, now try the page. So here, suppose I'm writing here CSB21001 as the roll number, and the password as, say, I'm typing here an invalid password for the first time, AAA, and clicking on login, it says that it is invalid user and password. Okay, that is, this condition happened, so we didn't want to do any change there. Now let's say we give here a valid password, which is your ABC123. And then if I click here, then what we can see is that now our page is, we are actually redirected to this studenthome.php as expected, right? So everything is fine up to this point, isn't it? So actually we achieved our goal. Now our login page is actually working. Now see here, this is our login page, as login PHP. So what our page is doing is that if you type here a valid pair of username and password, then we are redirected to the home page of the student. Otherwise, we are displayed, or we are shown a message here that says invalid username and password. So that's all, then that's done, right? But there is a thing here that I have to tell you. There is something which is not right. What is that something? Oh, let me show you. Now say for what is login? What is the purpose of this login page? This login page is actually, you can think like it is the gatekeeper, who stands in front of the gate, and any one person who wants to get into the building, then this gatekeeper actually checks his or her credentials, and if he finds his credentials are right, then he is allowed to get into the system. Otherwise, he is not allowed to get into the system, right? Now, the thing is, suppose as a user, instead of going through the main gate, what the user is trying to do is, now the user is actually trying to do something like this. Instead of going through the login page, now the user is trying to do something like this: localhost, our project, user interface, and then instead of typing there as login.php, the user is typing student home.php. That is, the student, that user is, or the student, that person is actually, or the user is actually trying to directly go to the student home.php page. And let's see what happens if the user does that. If the user clicks on, if the user presses enter, then immediately the user is allowed to view the content of that page. It means what? The user is now allowed to bypass the login page, which nullifies all the code that we have written in this login page, right? It means if the user is like, now somehow the user is now allowed to bypass the code which is written there in login page. That is, instead of going to the main door, the user actually trying to jump the wall and get into the system, which should not happen. And in this video, we are going to see how we can prevent, prevent some, prevent, all these things from happening. Like how we can prevent this from happening, actually. Okay, so that's the main content of today's video. So to do that thing, first thing that we have to know is we have to learn how to make use of the concept of session variable. So in this video, basically what we are going to learn is, along with this thing, actually you already learned like from a JavaScript function how we can redirect a page. That thing certainly you learned and that is useful. But other than this, the main content of this video will be the concept of session variable. And if we know the concept of session variable, then we will be able to fix this problem. That is this bypassing the login page. It means what? Somehow in this page we will add the functionality. That is, if somebody is trying to directly come to this page, then this page should be able to detect that thing, actually, that somebody is actually not coming from the login page. No, somebody is directly trying to come to this page. So if we can detect this thing here programmatically, then our problem is solved. And once we learn the concept of session variables, then we can fix this problem, very easily. And we will see that thing towards the end of the video. Okay. So now, first thing is that let me tell you something about the session variable, how to make use of the session variable, and then we'll fix this problem with this, in this login page. Okay, let's then begin with the session variable. Now, what is a session variable is? A session variable is an associative array which is global to all the code inside a particular application. Now see here, right now, our application is our project one. Right now, our application is this. So inside this application, whatever the code, whatever the server-side code we have written, like say, for example, we have written login.php, right? This file contains some server-side code. Also, we have written most probably login asx.php, or whatever that asx file we have in our code here. slogin asx.php. Okay, so that file actually I'm talking about. So slogin asx.php, and also we have right now we wrote one file, student home dot php. These are the php files inside our application right now. If as you can see here in this from this Visual Studio Editor or Visual Code Editor. Along with that, we have also these two files, db1 and db2. But since these two files were not intended to be a part of the main project, so I am not like talking about them. Okay, although they are there, they're actually here inside this db our project one application only. But let's say since now our like those were like we didn't write any so as I said, no, those two files were used only for explanation purpose. So I'm not mentioning them here, but they are there, like they are also a part of this project right now, until and unless I delete them from the, from that particular folder. Okay, but anyhow, let's say assume that they are not there, but mainly we have these three PHP files there. Now, what is a session variable? A session variable is, or a session is, it's actually, it's what is the session thing is that a session is, it's a global array. It's a global array. Not only an array, it's a specific type of array, and that specific type of array is your associative array. Associative array. Okay, like it's a global associative array. You know what is an associative array, as I explained you in the previous videos also. Like an associative array is an array of some key value pair. Say for example, key 1 implies some value 1. Say for example 101, and then key two, or instead of writing key value pair means like some key, against that key there are some values. Say for example, color implies say red. Okay, this is one key, color, the value of that key is red. Key, another key is key 1, the value is 101. And then say another key is say for example score, just writing some keys, and against that the score is say for example 99, like that. So an associative array looks something like this, that contains some key, and against that key there are some values there. So basically an associative array is an array of some key value pairs, key value, like that. So the same way, now this session is also an associative array. So session is an associative array, you understood that part. Now that come to this point, global. What does this global means? The global means what? This session array, that's why I have written it in this way. This session array is actually accessible from all the server-side code, like the code which is written inside this file, the code which is written inside this file, the code which is written inside this file. Or in future, if I write any other code, say for example anything, say for example abc.php, from that code also this session array will be accessible. So session array is a global array within the application. Certainly if you have another application, that application will have another session array of its own, and that session array has nothing to do with the session array of this application. Okay, these within this application, whatever the source codes are there, or whatever the server side code you have written, from all these code, this session array is accessible. So in that sense, session array is a global array, and it is an associative array. It means it stores its content in the form of key value pair. Now, what is the advantage of having such a global array? The advantage is, you see, here it means what? What is a global array? It means what? We can access, there is when I say we, it means the code from inside this login.php also can access this array, and the code from slogin.ajax also can access this array. This code also can access this array. It means this session array actually gives a way to exchange information among all these different PHP file. Okay, that should be, you should understand that concept. Okay, it means what? It allows different PHP files to exchange information. And how it is possible? Let's say an example. Okay, so for that reason, say we have a file called s1. I could have explained the thing with respect to these files also, but let me say for example we have a file s1.php. Now see, in this PHP file can access this session variable because it's a global variable. This PHP file can access this global array session, isn't it? So let's, what it is doing is, say for example it is creating a id, sorry, creating a key whose name is id, and there it is storing say 2. Okay, it means, because since these, from this PHP file this session array is accessible, it means what? From this PHP file, in this session array, we can create, as a programmer we can create a key and we can store some values there, right? That is inside this PHP file. Suppose this is the syntax. Assume, we'll see the actual syntax in a moment, but suppose what we're trying to do here is that session of id equal to 2. It means we want to create a key id, against that we want to store a 2 there in the session array. So it is possible. Since it's a global array, we can access that session array. Now suppose we have another PHP file s2.php. Now from there, what we can do is, as a programmer, now instead of storing, we can retrieve. Say for example, inside this code, we have written like session of id. That is, whatever it is there in the session array's id key, we want to retrieve it and we want to store it in a temporary variable, say t1. So it means what? From this file, we are storing a 2 in the session array, and from this file we are retrieving that 2, in a temporary variable t1. It means what? These file, from this file, we are storing some information here in the global array, and then from this file, we are actually retrieving the same information which was stored by this file. So it means what? Indirectly, what we are doing is we are actually passing these information, these two, from s1.php to s2.php through this session variable. So actually what this session variable is allowing you to do is, it is allowing you means the programmer, to exchange information across different pages. And that is how we can do that. Okay. So if you have understood up to this point, now let me write some actual code and show you these things, these things in action. Okay. Okay, then begin. Say first, again, I'll be exactly doing this example. That is, I'll be creating one s1.php, one s2.php, and then I'll try to pass some information from s1.php to s2.php. Okay, for that reason, what I'm going to do is, let's close this file. Okay, for the time being. And then there, what am I going to do is, see, I'm going to create a new file outside any folder. I want to create that new file outside any folder. So I'm creating it, say s1.php. And then again, I'll be needing another file there, whose name is s2.php. And then in s1.php, I want to write some PHP code. Say that is the starting tag of PHP, ending tag, ending PHP tag, and there inside that we want to, first thing is what we want to do in session s1.php. We want to create an ID first. We want to create a key first, whose name is ID, and then we want to store a 2 against that key. So one thing you have to remember now, as part of the syntax of writing the thing, whenever in a PHP program you are trying to access the session global variable, first thing you have to do is you have to make use of, or you have to call this function session start. Okay, then only, no matter whether you are accessing it or you are trying to store something there in the session variable, first thing is, whenever programmatically you are trying to interact with the session variable, first thing that you have to do is you have to call this function session start, which is an inbuilt PHP function. Once you do that, then what we want to create a key there. That is, we want to create a key value pair there, and that is very simple. What you do is you write $_session. This is like the name of the global variable. There we want to create an ID. If this ID is not there, it will be created. If this ID key is already there, then it will override the value of that particular key. Okay. And there we want to store a 2. Done. That's all that we want to do. As soon as this instruction is executed, what will happen is, as soon as that particular instruction is executed, it will create these name value pair or key value pair in the session array. Okay, done. And after that, just for the sake of demonstration, let me display here a message. Say echo and then session variable created. Some message I wanted to display. Okay, that's all. Done. S1.php is created. Now let's go to s2.php. And then in s2.php, what we want to access the value against this ID key, and we want to store it in a temporary variable, say t1. Let's do that. So again, here it's a PHP, like whatever the code we are writing, we want to interpret that code as, now we want the server to interpret that code as PHP code. So for that reason, we are making use of this starting and ending PHP tag. And inside that, what we want, first thing is we want to access, we want to interact with the session variable. So for that reason, first thing, you have to make use of that session_start function. Done. And after that, you are now allowed to do whether you want to create, you want to retrieve, you can do. So now here we want to retrieve actually. So for that reason, simple. We make use of a temporary variable set t1. There we want to store the value which is there against this key ID. Okay. And then we want to display. So for example, echo and then say the value retrieved is then concatenate this part with the value of the variable t1, right? Done. So we have these S1 and S2. Now suppose, now see, these two are independent files, right? This S1 is independent file, this S2 is also an independent file. Now from this browser, from the browser, what I can do is I can actually access any one of the page, right? I can write here s1.php and I can press enter, and also I can write s2.php and I can press enter. Now see, there will be a problem. Now see, if I first call s1.php, then it will create ID and it will store 2 there. And then if I call s2.php, then ID will be there and it will retrieve the value 2 and it is fine, no problem. But suppose without executing this file, if I execute this file, then what will happen? Because without executing this file, if I try to execute this file, then what is the code written inside this file? It is trying to access, inside that session array, it is trying to access the key ID, and it is trying to access the value against that key ID, right? So that is not there. So as a result, as expected, you can see some error message or some warning messages there. Okay, so that's what. Let's first try to access s2.php without actually, executing s1.php, and let's see what happens. I'm executing this s2.php, but see here, this is not inside user interface folder, so it's like directly inside that our project folder. So I have to write the path in that way, and I'm pressing enter. As soon as I press enter, you can see that it is saying me undefined array key ID in this particular file, line number 4. The value retrieved is blank. So that was expected, right? Now what is happening here is that we are first executing this s2.php, and there what is the code written is, the code written is like t1 is equal to session of id. Since that id key was not created and we are trying to access that id key, in line number 4 it is showing us this particular error message or warning message, and then after displaying this warning message, it is showing us that this is the retrieved value is blank. I mean, in t1 basically nothing is there, so it's showing us this blank. Okay, now see, one thing I want to do here, that like first thing is we want to verify whether that id is there or not. Okay, that whether that key id is there or not. If it is there, then only we want to execute some code. If it is not there, that is, we do not want to show this warning message. This warning message is coming because we are directly trying to access this id, and it will not be a problem if id is already there, but it will be problem, this warning message will come only when this id is not there in this session array. So for that reason, we can actually make use of a PHP function that is called as isSet function. Okay, now you can call isSet. Now it says like whether the value of a particular variable is set or not. Okay, so that function we can make use of. So isSet function, see here, if you write isSet, now the colon bool, it means that the return type of this function is bool. Okay, that is boolean, so either true or false. So I'm calling this isSet function, and then we want to check if this particular part or this particular variable is set or not, and we'll be writing an if else statement. If this particular key is set, or if the value of that particular variable is set, then we want to do something, otherwise we want to do something else. Now if it is set, then we want to do this thing, that is, we want to retrieve the value stored in that stored in that particular variable, and then we want to display the value of the variable. And if it is not set, then we want to display here another message, like say for example, the value, or the session, or simply I'm writing the value is not set. Okay, this is the message that will come. And then let's refresh this page and see what happens. I'm refreshing this page. Now it is saying me that the value is not set. The warning message is gone. It means what? It means what? now these s2.php page now knows actually in some way that whether this particular, that is what it is actually no, it is creating the content of the page based on this particular condition. If this condition is true, then this will be the content of the page. Basically this will be the content of the page, otherwise this will be the content of the page. That is what do not you think that is what we wanted with that student home.php? That is, if the user is directly trying to access the page, then we want to do something else. And if the user is trying to access the page from the login page or through the login page, we wanted something else to be displayed to the user, right? So that you should be able to connect. But anyhow, I'll come to that point. But just in the background of your mind, you should be able to see some link now. Okay, anyhow, let's proceed. Now, what it is doing is it is checking if the session variable is set, then it is displaying. It is retrieving the content of that variable and then it is displaying it on the screen. It will display it on the screen. Otherwise, it will display the that the value is not set. And that's what is happening. Like, because we are first, without executing this S1 page, we never till now we have not yet executed this s1.php page, and as a result this variable was not set, never set, and as a result that condition, this condition will be true always, and as a result this condition will be false always, and as a result this message is coming on the screen. Up to this point things should be clear. Okay, now let's move forward. Now say here again, once again, if I execute this page, it will always display me value is not set. Now suppose now first I call, say here I open another tab there. Let this tab be opened, and then I'm opening another tab, and there I'm executing this function page s1.php. I'm executing s1.php. Now see here, what was the code written in s1.php? It will first create an ID inside this session array. It will create a key whose name will be id, and it will store 2 against that key. Okay, and then it will display this message session variable created, and as a result we can see here that it is displaying you this message session variable created. Done. Now it means what? After this execution, after the execution of s1.php, this variable, this thing is set now. A key was created, which a key is created, which name is id, and the value against that key is 2. Now what happens is, now if we now access or if we now execute these s2.php, then what will happen is, as expected, it will see that the variable is set, and as a result it will retrieve the value of the variable and it will display the value of the variable on the screen. Let's press enter and see the result. As soon as I press enter, I'll see that the value retrieved is 2. It means what? See here, what we did is, in this s1.php we stored 2, and that 2 is now displayed in s2.php. It means what? As from s1.php we are actually sending some information to s2.php. It means 2 pages. We are actually, as a programmer, we are exchanging information across pages, and that is the main use case of this global variable session. Now, as you know, that session is a like an associative array. It means what? You can actually store as many key value pair as you want inside this session variable. So there is no limit. Like, I mean, that only one value you can set. Actually, you can set multiple. You can create multiple key value pairs there inside this array, and then you can retrieve them from different pages as you want. Okay. So up to this point, things should make sense, and then we are ready to solve our, our main problem there, the problem that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Okay, let's move then. Did I leave anything, like something that I have to tell you and I didn't tell you? Uh, that's all. s1.php. Now let's try with some other example. Now suppose inside this, now suppose inside this page, then what I do is, instead of storing a 2, I'm storing there a 34. Okay, and then I refresh this page. Then I refresh this s1.php page, and then I refresh this s2.php page. Then I will be seeing that, okay, then now the value which is retrieved is now 34. It means what? From s1 we are passing 34 through that global session variable to this s2.php. Okay, so up to this point, if everything is clear, now we are ready to move forward. Okay, let's move. Then what we want, okay, let's see first here. What we want is these s1 and s2 we do not want anymore, so let's close them, and then we go back to this sx handler base here. Okay, now what we want is that, like, we know, like, okay, also we want this user interface folder slogin.php, which is in turn, which again is calling this slogin.js. Okay, now here what is happening, it is making an ajax call, right? It is making an ajax call that this ajax call is actually handled inside this particular ajax.php file, and there what we are doing is we are retrieving based on the username and password specified by the user. Those username and password we are actually passing to this get id function, and as we know, this what this get id function is doing is it is making a database connection, and it is actually checking if this username and password is exists there in the database or not. As a result, and then it is returning an id. Now, if this pair doesn't exist in the database, then it is returning us -1. Otherwise, it is returning us some number, one or no greater than one. And then we are comparing this ID with this. We are comparing this ID with this -1. If it is -1, it means it's an error. If it is anything other than -1, it means that pair is there in the database, so it's okay now. That it's valid username and password. So this is what happening right now, right? Now what we want is that inside this function, see here, login as x.php. As soon as inside this function, what we're doing is inside this function we are actually connecting, oh sorry, inside this file we are connecting with the database, and we are retrieving the id. That id is either, it could be -1 if that pair is not there, or it could be some number one greater than or equal to 1, right? So in that case, this is the valid case and this is the invalid case. So what we want to do is that if the id is equal to -1, then what we want is we want to, okay, let's think for a moment. um, what we want to say, if it is okay, so we want to store that information in the session variable. So what I'll do is I will write here, since I want to access the session variable, so first thing is I'll do is I'll write session underscore start. Okay, I'll call this function, because that is the, like, whenever, as I said, no, whenever you want to access session variable, first thing that you have to do is you have to call that session.start function. And after that, what I want to do is store sorry, dollar underscore session, and there I want to create a key. I can call that key anything I want, but I'm calling it say id, and there I am storing the id which is returned by this particular function. Okay, like whatever it is, so the value of the variable id. Start and store it. Yeah, if it is not a valid pair of username and password, then I do not want to do anything. You just leave it as it is. Okay, for the time being, we can leave it as it is. See here, what is happening? If it is a valid pair of username and password, then only this session variable will be created. Okay, if it is not, from this as PHP file, what we are doing is, if in this case, like greater than or equal to 1, in this case only we are creating this name value pair. Otherwise we are not creating this name value pair. Now see, from here already we created a key id. So for that reason, to be on safe side, see here, whenever you create a session variable, it will be there until and unless you close your browser. That is the default behavior. And right now I cannot close my browser because my call is, or this video is getting recorded online. Okay, so for that reason I do not want to close that browser. So for that reason, so until and unless I close my browser, I can certainly remove a session variable programmatically, but I do not want to do it right now. So for that reason, that id key will be always there, okay, in the session variable. So what I'll do is, for this purpose, this login purpose, what I'll do is I will make use of a different key there. Okay, so I'll be calling it a student ID. Okay. So this student ID key will be created only when this student ID key will be created only when the ID is that username and password is there. That is, this particular function finds the supplied username and password in the database. Okay. That is, if it is not equal to -1, then only this particular key will be created, and against that key, actual value will be stored. Otherwise, that key will not be created. Okay, remember that thing. Otherwise, that key will not be created. We'll make use of this feature actually. Okay, done. After that, rest of the things are same. Let this server-side code return to the client-side code. There, let this page be redirected to, like based on the condition, let it be redirected to this particular page. Okay, done. Now we have to write some code here inside this student home.php. Okay, let's write some code. If we find any like error there, we'll do some modification. So now I'm erasing the content. Now here, instead of writing some text, I want to write some PHP code. So for that, I will be starting this PHP tag, and this is the end of the PHP tag. And here, what we want to do, we want to first check if we want to check. So first thing is that we want to access the session variable. So for that reason, I'll be calling this session underscore start function. So that is as usual. And then we want to check if the that is set, if is set, and then dollar underscore session, and there if there is a key called student ID. Let me check if it is right. The same key you have to mention here, student ID. If there is a key called session ID, if it is set, it means everything is fine. And because see here, how do you know everything is fine if this key is set? Because this key will be set only when that particular pair of username and password is found there in the database. That is, only when this ID is not equal to -1. If ID is equal to -1, it was not found, and that time, see, we didn't set the session variable. So this session variable or this session key, student ID key, will be created only when the pair was found there in the database. So that way we can be sure that if this pair is set, that is, if this particular key is set there in the session variable, then everything is fine. So we can display here echo. Okay, then you are a valid user. Welcome, say welcome valid user. Okay, that is, here actually we can display the details of the student on the screen. Okay, but for the time being, I'm just writing welcome valid user. And if it is not set, we can like display here that echo you are not a valid user. You are not a valid user. Okay, now let's say, now this is the code that we wrote inside this student home.php. Now let's say now go to our previous case where the user, say for example, tries to directly go to the user directly tries to go to student home.php. Say this thing oblique user interface oblique student home.php. This is the page. So in that case, what will happen is you are not a valid user message will come on the screen. Now see, this page is now knowing that somebody is directly trying to jump the wall and get into the campus. So that thing should not happen. Okay, because it is as if, like, if somebody wants to get into the campus, inside that campus you always should have a token. If that token is not found, it means you didn't come to said here. As soon as the person comes into the gets into the system, as if the gatekeeper always gives a token to that person. Okay, and then inside the campus anyone can capture a person and ask for the token. If the token is not found, it means that person actually jumped into the campus through the wall without actually getting the token, something like that. And this is just an analogy. Okay, if it is helpful, then it's fine. Otherwise, you can leave that thing. The point here is that right now these as student home.page, what it is doing is it is actually checking whether these particular these particular key is set there in the session variable or not. If it is set, then everything is fine, but if it is found that it is not set, it means that it is not fine. Now let's now try a different way. You see here we learned, like, if directly someone tries to access this student home dot page, that can be detected, and as a result we are displaying this message: you are not a valid user on the screen. That's fine. Now say for example, let's see what happens when the user tries to get into the system through the gate in a valid way. Okay, as log in PHP. Okay, there it is. In the gate you have to show your credential, say for example this CSB21001, and then here it is like mm, what is that, password was ABC123. Okay, and then I click on login button. Since it's a valid pair, it will be redirected to as login studenthome.php, and inside that page, see here, it is properly welcoming the user with a valid message like welcome valid user. It means now this page knows, like, whatever the credential it was asking for means now with the user, it was found, and that's why this page knows that that user is a valid user. Okay, so that's how we can solve this issue. Now more or less our login page is done. Now say there might be an issue here. Suppose for example, now um, not an issue exactly, this is how we solve the problem. Okay, but the thing is, for safety reason, what you can do is, if this id this now when in this login.asx page, if this thing is not found, then you can do one thing. We can access the session start variable, session start, and then like we're going to access the session variable once again. Then you can call a function like session underscore destroy. Okay, that is, if it is not a valid username and password, you erase. That is, see here what we are doing is, if this thing happens, that is, if it is -1, then we immediately want to erase. If anything is there in this session array, we want to erase those things. Okay, first, like, that will be helpful actually. Okay, that's all then for today's video. So what are things that we did is that in this login page, as login php page, as login.php page, what are things that we learned actually is that how to redirect to a different page using JavaScript code. And also we have learned the concept of session variable, and also we have learned like how using session variable we can pass information from one page to a different page. Okay, and then at the end, we using that concept, we fix the problem of directly coming to to a different page. That is, in our application there might be many different pages, but the thing that we want always is that we do not want to give a user direct access to any one of those pages. Okay, so for that reason, what we want is that we always want the user to come to this login page. That is, anytime a user goes to any one of those pages, first we check if the id field or the student id field is set in the session variable or not. If it is not set, it means that the student that user is directly trying to access the space, which should not happen. Okay, and if it is set, it means that where on there is only one place where we're setting that student id key in the session variable, and that place is this actually this slogin.asx space, which is actually in turn accessed from this login.php page. So for that reason, that way we are making sure that all the users gets into the system, that is gets into this our project one.system only via this login.php page, not directly accessing any one of the page. So that's all then for in today's video. So our first use case is done. That's congratulations. All we people actually completed our first use case, which is the login page. Okay, so in the next video we'll be doing another use case. Okay, we'll try to develop another use case, and there we'll be making use of all these different concepts that we learned in the last few videos, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, AJAX, and then how to connect to the database, and how to make use of the session variables, and all these different concepts we'll be using in the next use case. Okay, so till then, have a nice day.